My name is Ava. I'm 27, and I'm from Brooklyn, New York. People have always had something to say about how I look. It's not the first thing they tell you when they meet me, but it's the first thing they think. My tattoos are visible. One, of a snake coiling around my shoulder. Another etched into the side of my scalp that reaches the shaved side of my head. My hair is short and bold, like the tattoos, and I wear it with confidence. But I know how it's perceived. The sharpness of my appearance, the way I carry myself, it's not exactly normal. It's aggressive to some, intimidating to others. But it's me. I've spent years learning to embrace it, to stop apologizing for what doesn't fit into the neatly packaged box that the world often tries to force people into. Still, I'm aware of the judgment, the whispers, the glances. As I walked into that conference room today, I felt the usual discomfort settle in my chest. I could already feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, trying to fit me into the stereotype they had in mind. I had been in meetings before, had felt the same energy, the undercurrent of doubt and suspicion that was almost impossible to ignore. But I had earned my seat at that table. I had worked hard to get here, and I wasn't going to let their assumptions stand in the way of me proving what I was capable of. I wasn't just a pretty face or a woman with an attitude. I was good at what I did. I was smart, strategic, and determined, but I knew even before I sat down that the moment I walked in, they had already made up their minds. I could see the subtle shift in the room when I entered. I could feel it in the way people looked at me, some with curiosity, others with judgment. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I had become used to it, but that didn't mean it didn't sting. The silence that followed me was palpable. The air felt thick with expectations I hadn't asked for. They weren't expecting someone like me. The room was filled with polished, well-dressed professionals, the kind of people who had been groomed for these kinds of meetings their entire lives. And then there was me, dark lipstick, a bold outfit, my head shaved on one side. I could tell that they didn't know what to make of me. My appearance alone set me apart from the rest. But I wasn't here to make friends, and I wasn't here to play by their rules. I was here because I belonged. I had earned my spot. I could see his face, his eyes narrowing slightly as I walked in. He was older than me, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a tailored suit that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. He had that air about him, the one that said he knew everything and anyone who didn't fit into his perfect world didn't belong. I could feel the disdain rolling off him in waves. He didn't say anything, not yet, but the way he looked at me, his eyes scanning me from head to toe, lingering on my tattoos, my hair, the small mole on my cheek that I always hated, it told me everything I needed to know. In that instant, I knew what he thought of me. He thought I was a joke. He thought I couldn't be taken seriously. He thought I didn't belong here. I sat down, pulling the folder closer to me, trying to calm the rising tension in my chest. I had been here before, I reminded myself. This was nothing new. But it still hurt. It always hurt. The world had a way of reminding you that you didn't fit. They had a way of making you feel small when you didn't meet their expectations. But I wasn't small. I wasn't going to shrink for anyone. I wasn't here to play nice or to fit into their world. I was here to prove that my worth wasn't something they could define by what they saw on the outside. The moment he opened his mouth to speak, I could feel the weight of his words already pressing down on me. It wasn't even what he said that stung. It was the tone, the judgment, the assumption that my appearance made me less capable, less serious. It wasn't the first time this had happened. People like him always assumed that if you didn't look the part, you couldn't play the part. And yet, I knew something he didn't. I was more than my appearance. The moment I walked in, I had already decided that I wasn't going to let his perception control me. I had worked for this moment, and I wasn't going to let him or anyone else make me doubt myself. I would show him and everyone else in this room that I was more than just the face they saw. I was the person who had worked for every step to get here, the person who deserved to be in this room, and nothing, especially not his condescending look, was going to take that from me. But the tension in the room kept growing. I could feel his disbelief, the way he was questioning my very presence. The judgment was so thick, so real. Yet, despite it all, I held my ground. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. I wasn't here for approval. I was here because I had earned my place, and one way or another, I would prove it. I could feel his eyes on me before he even spoke, the weight of his gaze heavy with judgment, dismissive in a way that made my stomach tighten. His posture stiffened, a quiet, silent communication of his discomfort with my presence. He had already decided I wasn't worth his time, that I didn't belong in this meeting. I tried to ignore the pit that was forming in my chest, the gnawing feeling that the moment I sat down, I had already been written off. His first words, when they came, felt like a slap. They weren't loud, but the force behind them was unmistakable. "I'm not sure how seriously I can take someone with such a look," he said, the words dripping with condescension. The rest of the room went still. I could feel the awkward tension building, the way the others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but they didn't say anything. He was the authority here, and no one was about to challenge him. They didn't have to. His words alone were enough to make everyone look away, as if he had already decided my worth for me. For a moment I froze, the sting of his dismissal sinking in deeper than I wanted to admit. I wasn't new to this feeling, but every time it happened, it still felt like a punch to the gut. They saw me as just another woman with a face that didn't belong in the boardroom, someone whose appearance didn't fit the professional image they all wanted to uphold. I could see it in the way their eyes flickered away from mine, the way they hesitated before they spoke. It was as though they were all waiting for me to apologize for being there, for not fitting the mold. I could hear the words in my head, echoing the same doubts I'd spent years trying to silence. "You're not enough. You don't belong here. You're just a pretty face with no substance." I had worked so hard to get here, to prove that I wasn't just another stereotype, that my tattoos and my style didn't define me. But all of that effort felt like it was slipping through my fingers, washed away by a single glance, a single comment. My heart raced, and for a brief moment, I almost let the doubt consume me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe this world wasn't for people like me. But something inside me fought against that thought. It was a struggle, a fight to remind myself of who I was and what I had accomplished to even make it this far. He couldn't see the hours I'd spent perfecting my craft, the sacrifices I'd made to climb the ladder. He couldn't see how hard I had fought to be here. None of them could, but it didn't matter. He wasn't the one who would define my future. He wasn't the one who would decide if I was good enough. I wouldn't let him. As he continued speaking, dismissing my presence as if I wasn't worth his time, I let the words wash over me. It was hard. It was humiliating, but I held my ground. I clenched my fists under the table, willing myself not to react, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me shaken. I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to belittle me, to make me feel small, to push me into a corner where I had no choice but to retreat. But I wasn't going to let him. I wouldn't let him win. The others in the room didn't say anything, their silence only reinforcing his words, his power, and their complicity. It was as if they had already decided for me, as if they didn't think I was worth the effort of fighting for. But I knew one thing for sure. They were wrong. I wasn't the stereotype he thought I was. I wasn't the sum of my appearance. I was more than what they saw, and I wasn't going to back down. It was tempting to walk away, to let them have their way, to let him continue thinking he had won. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. As much as his words stung, I knew I had something they couldn't take away. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to cower. Instead, I decided then and there that I would make him see. I would show him that no matter what he thought of me, I had earned my place here. His dismissal, his arrogance, wasn't going to stop me. It was only going to fuel the fire inside me. And when the moment came, when I had the chance to prove myself, I would make sure he knew that I was more than just a face, more than just a woman who didn't fit his ideal. I would show him what I was really capable of. The room felt colder after his words, like a weight had settled over me that I couldn't shake off. His dismissive tone lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, pressing against my chest. I could feel the sweat beginning to bead at the back of my neck, the tightness in my throat. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the doubt. The seed of uncertainty he had planted began to grow, spreading through my veins like poison. I had always prided myself on my ability to rise above the judgments, on my ability to walk into rooms like this and command the respect I deserved, regardless of how I looked. But in that moment, as his voice rang in my ears, I felt the confidence that had carried me here begin to crack. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe my appearance was all they saw, and nothing more. Maybe I had been deluding myself all along. The silence in the room pressed in, thicker than ever, and I couldn't escape the feeling that every eye in the room was now judging me, waiting to see what I would do next. The looks from the others were subtle, pity, discomfort, a few whispers. But they were there. They were all there, like a sea of silent judges, eyes glued to me, waiting for me to fail. I had spent so many years fighting to be seen as more than what people saw on the surface. And yet, here I was, back at square one, questioning everything I had worked for. I could feel the tension building in my chest, my breath growing shallow, like I was drowning in my own thoughts. I tried to steady myself, to gather the fragments of my resolve, but the words he had thrown at me, those words that made me feel small, kept echoing in my mind. With a face like yours, you couldn't be taken seriously. The words replayed over and over like a broken record. Every part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that my worth wasn't determined by how I looked, that I was capable, that I had the skills, the intelligence, the experience to do this job. But instead, all I could do was sit there frozen in my seat, the doubt clawing at me. The room seemed to spin, the edges of my vision blurring. I wasn't used to feeling this way. I wasn't used to feeling like I had no control, like I was at the mercy of someone else's judgment. For a moment, I wished I could disappear, wished I could shrink into nothingness and escape the uncomfortable weight of their eyes. My hands were shaking now, betraying the calm exterior I tried to maintain. The last thing I wanted was for them to see my vulnerability. I had worked so hard to get here, to make a name for myself, to prove I was more than just my appearance. And now, it felt like it was all slipping away, like I was being reduced to nothing but the tattoos on my skin, the way I carried myself, the things people saw before they looked any deeper. My breath caught in my throat, and for a brief moment, I wondered if this was all a mistake. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe he was right. I wasn't cut out for this. I wasn't good enough. These thoughts ran wild in my head, threatening to unravel me. But deep down, a part of me knew better. This wasn't who I was. This moment of doubt wasn't the end. It was just a moment, a fleeting feeling that would pass if I allowed myself to push through it. But pushing through was harder than it had ever been. I had spent years building a shell around me, a barrier to protect myself from the world's judgment. And now, with his words, that shell felt fragile, cracking under the pressure of his assumptions. I tried to breathe, to steady myself. But the more I thought about his words, the more they took root in my mind. I could feel the confidence slipping away, piece by piece, until all that was left was doubt. The worst part was that I knew this feeling, this moment of weakness, would linger. It would follow me throughout the rest of the meeting, haunting me in every word I spoke, every gesture I made. I hated this feeling. I hated the way it made me question everything about myself. I was better than this. I had to be better than this. And yet, the doubt didn't disappear. It stayed, like a shadow, hanging over me, whispering that maybe, just maybe, he was right about me. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe I had been fighting for something that wasn't meant for someone like me. I couldn't let that thought take hold. I wouldn't let it. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to shut it out. The longer I sat there, the heavier the doubt became. It was like an anchor, dragging me deeper into the pit of my own insecurities. Every second stretched out, every eye in the room seemed to intensify their gaze, and the silence became deafening. My heart raced in my chest and I could feel the heat rising in my face. But in the midst of that growing tension, something inside me stirred. A small flicker of resolve, a whisper in the back of my mind that urged me not to back down. I couldn't let this moment, this brief lapse of judgment, be the thing that defined me. I had worked too hard, fought too much to get here, to let a single comment from someone who didn't even know me take me down. Slowly, I breathed in, letting the air fill my lungs, and I exhaled with purpose. The room didn't change. The eyes still burned into me. But I felt the shift within myself. The tremors of doubt that had been consuming me began to fade, replaced by something stronger, something I hadn't even realized I'd been holding back. A quiet confidence started to build. It wasn't loud or brash. It wasn't flashy. But it was there, steady and undeniable. I had earned my place here, not because of my appearance, not because I fit into some mold, but because of who I was beneath all of that. I had skills, experience, and an understanding of this world that no one could take away from me. As I sat there, hands steadying on the table in front of me, I realized how much power I had been giving away to others. I had allowed their judgments to define me, to make me second-guess myself when, in truth, I knew exactly who I was. It wasn't the way I looked that made me worthy of being here. It was my work, my determination, and my willingness to fight for my place. The confidence that had begun to seep back into me wasn't just about ignoring what he had said. It was about knowing deep down that I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need him to see me as capable, and I didn't need the rest of the room to change their perception of me. I knew what I could do. I had proven it to myself already. I straightened up in my seat, meeting his gaze, not with defiance, but with clarity. I was done hiding behind the insecurity that had crept up during those few seconds of doubt. I wasn't the girl they thought I was, and I wasn't the girl who would shrink because someone didn't see my worth. I had worked too hard to get here to let anyone tell me I didn't belong. The moment felt like it lasted forever, and yet I knew this was the defining moment. Not his words, not his judgment, but how I responded to them. I could feel my pulse calm, the panic subsiding. I was taking control of the situation. I was taking control of my own narrative. It was almost as if I could feel the room shifting, too. There was a subtle change in the energy around me. Maybe they hadn't expected this. Maybe they hadn't expected me to rise above it. But I did. And that was all that mattered. I wasn't playing the game the way they wanted me to anymore. I was playing it my way, the way I had always wanted to. Slowly, I started to speak, the words coming more confidently than I had expected. I didn't stutter. I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what I was saying, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like my voice was being heard. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. It wasn't even about his opinion. It was about me asserting my place in this world, despite the obstacles I had faced. It was about showing them that I was capable of more than they could ever understand. The shift was complete. I could feel it in every part of me, like the last of the tension had snapped. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the girl with tattoos or a shaved head. I was the person who had earned her seat at this table, and nothing, no one could take that away from me. I wasn't here by chance. I was here because I had fought for this, because I was worthy, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget it. The energy in the room shifted once again, but this time, it wasn't because of anything he said. It was because of the way I held myself, the quiet confidence that radiated from me now, despite the undercurrent of judgment I had been battling. I felt like the ground beneath me had solidified, like the space I occupied was no longer one I had to fight for. I could feel his gaze on me, and it was different now. His eyes weren't filled with disdain anymore. They were searching, confused. Something had changed and he couldn't quite figure it out. I knew I had to make him see, to make him understand who I was. And so, without hesitation, I reached into my bag and pulled out the contract. I laid it flat on the table between us. The papers crisp and firm, a physical representation of everything I had worked for. The room grew quiet again, the weight of the moment palpable in the air. He looked at the papers first, his brows furrowing as he scanned the top, as if searching for something that didn't quite make sense. But there it was, my name, bold and official, the name he had heard but hadn't realized the true significance of. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. The look in his face changed, just slightly, but enough to notice. His lips parted, like he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. The room felt like it held its breath, as if everyone else was waiting for him to finally speak, to break the silence, to make sense of the reality he had just encountered. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I let the weight of the contract, the official papers, speak for me. It wasn't just my name on them. It was my achievement, my place in this world, the one they had thought I didn't deserve. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the papers, running them through his hands, no longer with the certainty he had before. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he processed what this meant. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He had been so sure of himself, so confident that my appearance would make me incapable of standing my ground. He had assumed that I was just another face in the crowd, just another woman with tattoos and a style that didn't fit the mold. But I wasn't. And now, he was beginning to see that. It wasn't the contract that mattered. It wasn't the papers, or the numbers or the deals. It was what they represented. All the years of work, all the late nights, all the sacrifices I had made to get to this point. It was everything that he had dismissed about me in an instant because of what he saw on the outside. His face changed again, his features hardening, as if he was trying to regain control of the situation. But I could see the truth in his eyes. He had underestimated me, and it was too late to go back. I had already claimed my space here, and no amount of disdain or judgment would ever take that away from me. The realization was sinking in for him, and it was almost satisfying to watch. It wasn't about humiliating him or proving him wrong. It was about proving something to myself. I wasn't the girl who could be written off because of her appearance. I wasn't just a person with tattoos and a shaved head. I was capable. I was smart. And I belonged here, in this room, in this moment. The silence lingered, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes before a change, before the shift in power, before the moment of truth. And in that silence, I knew that everything had changed. He knew it too. He could no longer pretend that I didn't belong here. His eyes met mine, and for the first time there was no judgment there. There was respect, grudging as it might have been, but it was there. I could feel the shift in the air, the subtle change in the way the others in the room were now looking at me. No longer was I the girl they had assumed I was. No longer was I invisible. I was the one with the contract, I was the one who had earned this moment, and in the end, that was all that mattered. I watched him, still staring at the contract, the realization slowly settling in. His fingers, once so sure as they signed documents, now trembled slightly as they held the papers. It was as if he were seeing me for the first time, seeing me not just as someone with a certain look, but as someone who had earned her place. The energy in the room had shifted, and it was undeniable. He had been so sure of himself earlier, confident that I didn't belong in this space, that my appearance would define me in a way that made me unworthy of serious consideration. But now, there was a crack in that certainty. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something different in his eyes. It wasn't disdain or superiority. It was recognition. And it wasn't just about the contract. It was about everything that had led to this moment. The years of hard work, the battles I had fought just to be seen as equal. I could feel the weight of all those years in the air. It wasn't just the moment that had shifted, it was me. I had stepped into a space I had never been given permission to occupy, and now that I was here, no one could take that away from me. The room was silent, but this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a calm after a storm, like everything was finally falling into place. I had proven my worth, not just to him, but to everyone in that room. I had shown them that my worth wasn't tied to how I looked, but to what I could do, to who I was. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to fit into their narrow view of what a successful woman looked like. I was already enough. The weight that had once felt like a heavy burden on my chest, the weight of doubt, of insecurity, was now gone. In its place was something stronger, something rooted in the truth of who I was and what I had earned. It was like a weight had lifted from my shoulders, and for the first time, I could breathe freely, unburdened by the fear of being judged, unburdened by the expectation of proving myself to anyone else. He signed the contract, his signature sharp and final. The moment felt like a small victory, but in reality, it was so much more than that. It was a victory over the assumptions people had made about me for years, a victory over every moment. I had doubted myself because of the way the world saw me. As the pen hovered over the paper, he hesitated for the briefest moment, then completed the signature, and when he lifted his eyes again, I saw a shift in him. It wasn't admiration. Not exactly. It wasn't even respect, though I knew I had earned that. It was acknowledgement. He had underestimated me. He had seen only my appearance and not the strength behind it, the strength that had carried me through every obstacle. And now, he had no choice but to see it. The deal was done. The contract was signed. But the real victory wasn't in the air. Papers, it wasn't in the contract or in his acknowledgement. The real victory was in the transformation that had taken place inside me. I had spent my whole life being told who I was, being told that I wasn't enough, that I was too much of this, too little of that. But in that moment, I realized that none of that mattered anymore. I wasn't the girl who had to fight for a place at the table. I was the woman who belonged there, who had earned her spot by doing the work, by being strong, by being who she was, regardless of how anyone else saw her. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into their world. I was going to keep standing tall, keep proving that I had something to offer, and no one, not him or anyone else, could take that away from me. The victory wasn't just in signing a contract. It was in the power I had reclaimed. I had taken back control of my narrative, and for the first time, I was truly free to be who I was without apology. And as I walked out of that room, I felt it, the power that came from knowing without a doubt that I was worthy of every success I would earn from here on out. The world could see me however it wanted, but I knew the truth I had already won,